What comes to your mind when you think about Islam? Do you think of friends and allies in our cultural conflicts and arguments and disagreements, or do you think of enemies and even warfare and violence? Well, or maybe there's something in between. This series, I am doing my best to do some research and present to you a fair and accurate picture as much as I can with my amateur resources. But my goal is not to slander. My goal is not to misrepresent, or caricature. In fact, quite the opposite, because I, on this channel, will not pretend to be unbiased. I will not pretend to be an expert. But what I do want to accomplish is I want to make a good case, the best that I can. First of all, I want to share information with you and educate myself, and make sure that I have an accurate understanding of these things that I claim to support or oppose. But I also want to build an accurate picture that I can then make a case of why I support or oppose that thing. So here in this series that I'm calling the American Cold War, we are looking at a number of different issues, a number of different people groups, everything from religions to ideologies, and maybe some specific people or events. Who knows where this is going to lead? But there is a lot going on in our country here in the United States these days, and there is so very little understanding far too often on both sides of the political aisle. But that's just the thing. This conflict is so much more than just politics. It usually takes the form of politics, but there is so much more at work. And I hope that this series, this video, can be beneficial to you. Just to put my own biases out front for you guys to know, I am a Christian of the Lutheran variety, very devoutly so. I am a very conservative person when it comes to my politics, and so that's generally what's going to shape most of my own worldview. And as I discuss these topics, I want to kind of have a bit more measured approach, so I'm not going to be getting as crazy when I'm discussing these things. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be reading from my notes today a lot, because I want to make sure I get these things accurate. As much as I would love to tell you that I have a steel trap mind, that is not in fact the case. So I have definitely given it far too much ado already, so let's get into it. So if you'll recall, our last video, I gave the introduction, and we talked about just the very, very basics. I introduced the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and the Hadiths, and we talked a little bit about the 6 basic beliefs in Islam and the 5 pillars of Islam. So that's kind of the basic ideas behind the religion, and then the most important fundamental practices in the religion. Well, today we're going to continue to expand on those themes, but we're going to do a lot of discussion on kind of particular terms, because that's going to set the stage for the next video, which I'm going to try to get into more of so today's going to be a little bit more focused on understanding certain terms and kind of a little bit more about the religious life of a Muslim. And then next time we're going to start to discuss more of history. And it's going to start to get a little bit more tense, I guess you can say, as we discuss particularly the conflict between Islam and Christianity through history. And my goal is to take that all the way into today here in the United States. So to give you kind of a, by no means exhaustive, but a decent summary of how we've gotten to this point. So I realized something in the first video, and that is that I didn't cover what the actual meaning of the term Islam is. So Islam translates to submission or surrender, and that's going to be a very common theme in these videos when we discuss the Islamic religion. So it is all about submission, as in submission to God's will, total and complete submission of yourself, of your own will, to God's will. So the next term we're talking about is Tawhid, and I do apologize in advance. We also discussed last time the significance of the Arabic language in Islam, and that means that there is an Arabic term for everything. So I actually, believe it or not, in college, I took a couple of Arabic classes as I was about to enter the military. So I kind of wanted to understand the region I was most likely going to be operating in. And unfortunately, not a lot of it stuck with me, but I do remember a little bit about how to pronounce certain words. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm almost definitely going to mess it up. So Tawhid is one of the most fundamental, one of the most important doctrines in the entire religion. And that is because it translates to oneness or unification or making one. And this is the opposite of another term that we're about to talk about called Shirk. But Tawhid is fundamental because it's talking about specifically the oneness of God. So Muslims believe that Islam is the ultimate expression of pure monotheism. So we mentioned also last time that Islam is one of the three primary Abrahamic religions, which are all monotheistic faiths, meaning they believe in one God. However, Tawhid is an extra level of emphasis on this idea. And what I mean by that is that they would not recognize the Christian understanding, the Trinitarian understanding of God as Tawhid. They believe that that is actually Shirk, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. So they believe that God is one. He's completely all-powerful. He is one being, period. There's not three persons in there that make up one essence as the Trinity in Christianity, but he is one being. He's completely unique. He is eternal and one of a kind in every sense of the term. So Shirk is the opposite of that, and it comes from the Arabic root meaning to share or to associate. What Shirk is, first of all, is the most grave sin in Islam. And there's a couple different degrees. There's major shirk and minor shirk. But what it is it's essentially idolatry, in a sense. It's worshiping or offering worship or prayer to anything but God himself. So kind of with that idea of sharing, it means essentially elevating something or someone to the same level of God. So in the Muslim understanding, that's what they think. Because they don't recognize Jesus as the divine Son, the second person in the Trinity that makes up God, they believe that Christians are elevating one of the prophets up to the level of God, so they don't believe that Jesus is divine in any way, shape, or form. They believe he was an exceptional human being, but surpassed only by Muhammad himself, but that does not equate him with God in the Muslim understanding. So major shirk would include things like worshiping or offering prayer to idols, to saints or angels. So you're not going to find anything like in the Roman Catholic Church where there's a veneration of the saints, and they will not pray to anything created at all. So they believe that this cuts you off from Islam entirely, and unless you have a sincere and dramatic repentance, this will in fact damn you to hell. Minor shirk, on the other hand, is going to be things like being very showy, very shallow in your prayers, mostly for your own glory. It's going to be swearing by things other than God. So when you swear as a Muslim, you should only swear by God, and that's why you hear, terms such as, inshallah, God willing, and that sort. Very, very common in Muslim life. And also believing in, I didn't finish my note on that one, but believing in essentially that objects or talismans or things like that have some kind of special quality or holy quality to them. Such as, what comes to my mind is like the gemstone girls that recharge their gemstones, the New Age thing where they put like gemstones by the sun to recharge, and you carry these rocks around with you because they give you certain properties, certain benefits, certain buffs in life. But But committing minor shirk does not entirely cut you out of the faith, but it is still a very grave topic. So I've definitely talked about this enough. Oh, according to Islamic theology, Christians are guilty of shirk, of particularly greater shirk, like I mentioned earlier, because they're elevating Jesus to the level of God. And so by that reasoning, which is found in Surah, remember the chapters in the Quran are called surahs. It's found in Surah 5, verses 72 and 73, Surah 4, verse 171, and Surah 9, verse 31 is where you can find evidence that they consider Christians to be guilty of the sin of shirk. And why do I mention that? Why do I take that time to emphasize that they don't believe Christians are Muslims in any way, shape, or form? Even though they do have a certain level of respect, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. Well, I bring that up because, as I said, so the first video I tried to be very measured. This video I'm going to try to be also very measured and neutral for the most part. But we are going to inevitably get to a point where we're going to have to discuss some uncomfortable things because there has been a lot of tension and a lot of conflict between Christians and Muslims for really the entirety of the religion's existence. So that's going to come up more in future discussions. But for now, we're going to get back to just simply sharing the basics, the basic information about Islam. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Ummah. The Ummah translates roughly to nation or people, but it comes from the root meaning mother. So the Ummah is, when you usually hear that term, it's usually referring to the Muslim Ummah. So it can refer to just countries or nations broadly, but usually when it's being used in Muslim discussions, it's referring to the global community of Muslims. And this is a transcendental thing. It transcends nationalities, ethnicities, race, languages, geography, borders, all that. So there is a sense, even though there is division within Islam, there are definitely different groups that don't always get along and see eye to eye on everything, and at times even come to blows, sadly enough. But they do have this sense of unity. Remember, Islam means submission, and Tawhid is one of the most important doctrines. You're going to see those themes kind of reinforced throughout these different doctrines, and the Ummah is one of those places that you can kind of see that theme continuing here. So if nothing else, most Muslims in the world are going to be united in things like that belief in the Tawhid, the oneness of God, acceptance of the Prophet Muhammad and his the Quran that was revealed to him, and as well as what's called the Sunnah, which is his life and example and sayings as are recorded in the Hadiths. And then they're shared, essentially the 5 pillars of Islam at the very least. So Shias actually have a few additional pillars most of the time, but they're all usually going to at least agree on those 5, which, if you don't recall, that is your daily prayers, your giving to charity, your fasting, shown in the month of Ramadan, and the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca. So again, this kind of transcends the Sunni-Shia divide, so they would usually consider, I have seen where groups have considered one another not truly Muslim, but most Muslims are going to consider most other Muslims, even if it's not within their particular group, part of the Ummah, the global community. This was definitely a lot more tangible in earlier Islam, especially when they had this very vast nation called the Caliphate, or much compared to today, where it's a little bit more of a kind of a more spiritual or aspirational idea, where most Muslims want that to become a reality once more. They believe that the whole world will become Muslim in time, but there's a lot more division in formal divisions as far as like different countries and things like that than there used to be for Muslims. So moving on, we are going to talk about al-Kitab, which translates to the people of the book. So I mentioned earlier that Christians are afforded a kind of special respect in Islam that others are not. and this is Christians and Jews. And that is because these two groups are referred to as the people of the book. And what that means is that Muslims recognize that they are groups that have received genuine divine revelation in the past. So the Jews, they believe, received the Torah. The Christians, through Christ, received the gospel. And the Muslims are the ones that have the perfected final version of the religion, which is Islam, as revealed through the Prophet Muhammad by the Quran. So they are not a part of the Ummah that I mentioned. So the Ummah is just, you can kind of see how we're kind of progressing here in this discussion. So the Ummah is the community of Muslims. Kind of this next segment of society is all the Jews and Christians, which are the people of the book. And then beyond that, you've got essentially all the other non-believers. So typically it's the other polytheists and the anyone who's not a believer in any of these other previously mentioned religions, and they kind of have a status kind of below that. So especially when you get into formal Islamic countries, formally Islamic states, and you kind of get this tiered society that we will talk about. I'm going to focus more on that in future videos, but just know that that's kind of how Muslim society is oriented there. So there are a couple groups that there have been the cases made that they also kind of are considered people of the book, and that's going to include your Zoroastrians and actually a Gnostic group known as the Sabians, which I know almost nothing about other than they have some link or particular respect for John the Baptist. Though it's not entirely clear to me if they are more a derivative of Christianity and thereby being a Gnostic group, or if they are a derivative of Islam, or if they're just kind of their own thing entirely. But anyways, with all of this, they're given a particular respect and certain protections. So we're going to come up with the term dhimmi that we're going to discuss in the future. But essentially it refers to the protected. But they are still ultimately called to submit to Islam. If that means they don't become Muslim, then there are other ways that they essentially submit to Islam. But moving on. So this next topic is a little loaded with people have a lot of strong feelings about this, but we're going to try to be as neutral here as possible. And that is Sharia, or Sharia law. So Sharia translates to the path to water, or the path to water. And if you remember that this originated in a kind of a desert society, you kind of get that image of the significance here. So, water is obviously important for human beings to live. Well, even more so in the desert, where water is a very rare resource. So Sharia is this, it's the practical, in a few words, it is the practical application of Islam on daily life, on all of society. So Sharia can be implemented at different levels. So obviously, your individual Muslim is going to try to live by Sharia. The local Muslim congregation is going to try to be living by Sharia. But this can scale all the way up to entire countries, or in the past, entire empires, where multiple nations have been incorporated here, that have a system of Sharia law implemented into the actual government of all of society, not just specifically the Muslims. And you can see kind of a thing with, so in the United States, we have a big discussion, a big debate over the division, the separation of church and state. And usually that's in the context of Christianity, and how much is Christianity allowed to be a direct influence in the state, or is the state supposed to be completely secular? And again, remember, there are secular nations that are predominantly Muslim as well, but they just aren't formally Muslim. But typically in Islam, there's a lot more of a blurring of that line between church and state, if not that line being erased entirely, and Sharia being implemented upon the entirety of society, and overtly so. and it covers all aspects of life. This is a comprehensive code of conduct. So it covers, the pillars of Islam, marriage and divorce, inheritance, commercial activity and the economy, contracts, criminal justice and civil justice, and ethics, interpersonal relationships, and on and on and on. And how you shape this system, how you implement this system, it's got kind of a level of progression here. So at first, you're always going to start with the Quran. So that is the first place that you go to find Sharia and how to implement Sharia. And then after that, you have the Sunnah, which is, again, the teachings, the sayings, the example of the Prophet Muhammad as written and recorded in the Hadith. So those are your first two. And that's kind of regarded as, we got a couple terms we're about to weigh against one another here. That's kind of your more proper Sharia, which is kind of the ideal, the divine, the true perfect guidance. But it's really only wholly known fully to God. So there's another term called Fiqh, I believe is how you say it. And this is Islamic, what's called Islamic jurisprudence. So after the Quran and the Sunnah, you have, not everything is always clear. So that gives a lot of rules. So think of this as like the 10 Commandments on steroids. It's kind of what I'm getting at with this whole talk of Sharia here. It's like the 10 Commandments, or essentially the old law of Moses, where you had just hundreds of regulations that shaped this nation and how it was supposed to act and function in society. Well, sometimes there are answers that you still don't have even after you've consulted the Quran, after you've consulted the Hadith. You still are left, okay, well, I still haven't really resolved my issue. So then you rely on the third level, which is consensus. And used to be more of community consensus, but now in the modern day is kind of specifically the consensus of Muslim scholars. So they spend all their time and energy focusing, studying the first two layers that we talked about, and they then discuss amongst themselves and kind of reason out the rulings that are then applied based on the principles taught in those first two things. Well, if that still doesn't answer your question, then you have analogy and reason, or sometimes those are combined into what's called analogous reasoning. And what that means is just a fancy term for, so for example, alcohol is explicitly forbidden, but not necessarily certain drugs or drugs in general. However, you can use this analogy of, well, okay, alcohol is forbidden because it's an intoxicant, it alters my state of mind, and so do these drugs, so it would reason to believe that drugs should also be forbidden. So that is an example of analogous reasoning. So all this, applying Sharia law, has not always been a exact science. It hasn't always been we've taken over this, we've become the majority in this country, or we've taken over this country, we're going to implement Sharia law, boom, done. No, there is actually different approaches to doing this, and there's different methodologies and traditions and all that, with that focus on different things, and those are what are known as the schools of Islam. But we're going to put a pin in that one because we're going to come back to that here closer to the end. So something that, if you're aware of internet culture, you've certainly seen come up before in jokes, is halal and haram. So this is absolutely haram. This is an important idea. So actions in your society that a person can perform kind of have like their own tiered system. They're like kind of levels of, are they permissible? Is it an act of worship? Is it a praiseworthy action? Is it kind of a neutral but allowed action? Or is it discouraged, or is it just outright forbidden? So that's kind of your basic tiers there, but you can kind of break it up really largely into two camps, and that is halal and that is haram. So actions that are halal are lawful. They are permissible. Actions that are haram are unlawful, or they are forbidden or prohibited. So, and examples of that kind of in a couple different areas of life. So food and drink. So examples of things that are halal or lawful or allowed are most foods, but meat has to be slaughtered and prepared in a specific way to be considered halal. However, haram would be pork, specifically, or ingesting blood, or drinking alcohol, or partaking of drugs. So that's your haram section there, kind of in the realm of food and drink. In the area of finance, halal would be ethical trade, or it would be, performing your legitimate business that you can make a profit from, so long as it is done in a legitimate, legal, allowable way, a moral way. Haram, however, is usury, so interest or excessive interest. So from what I understand, kind of more in the Christian understanding of usury, it's excessive interest. It wasn't clear to me. I should have looked this up. I was trying to write up a bunch of notes really quick, so I don't know if it's interest is entirely forbidden in Islam, or if it's just that idea of excessive interest. And what is excessive? Where's the dividing line there? I don't know. But gambling is also considered haram. So that's just an example in the realm of finance. Again, this applies through all aspects of life, so we could go all day long giving examples of things that are halal and things that are haram. Gray areas. So there is a famous hadith within Islam that says the halal is clear and the haram is clear, and between them are doubtful matters. Whoever avoids the doubtful protects his religion and honor. So basically, when in doubt, if you don't know if something is permissible or not, just don't do it. And as a Christian, that is very interesting to me, because I would apply basically that same reasoning to whether I believe something is sinful or not. So there's a lot of things in Christianity that are clearly labeled as sinful. There are some things that we're not entirely sure. So when in doubt, you are better able to protect yourself and your faith if you just avoid it, if you don't know for sure. So moving on, we have a very key thing in Islam, and that is the masjid or mosques. And what are they? Well, they're the same thing. So actually, the difference between the two is purely a linguistic one. So masjid or masjid, this is the proper Arabic term, whereas mosque, even though it sounds Arabic, is the kind of transliterated version of masjid. And what it is, it's referring to... So masjid translates to the place of prostration, as in you are laying yourself out, you're prostrating yourself for prayer, and which is going to tell you exactly what this refers to. So I'm sure you know what a mosque is, but if you don't know what it is the house of worship in Islam. It is analogous to the local church, but it is far more than just a building, because it is the center of all life for the Muslim. It is a sacred space that embodies Islam in its very design, and it promotes the unity of believers and the practice of Sharia in daily life. So, like I said, it is analogous to your local church. So the mosque and your local Christian church are going to be pretty much the same thing, serve very similar purposes. Some characteristics. So some physical characteristics of a mosque. Typically, it's going to have a prayer hall, which is like the most important thing. This is where the Muslims are going to come in to conduct their daily prayers. You are in certain if you can't get to the mosque in time, there are provisions where you can pray wherever you're at, but there's a special it's special to be in the mosque. My white lips, I'm just going to say mosque because it's a little easier for me. But the interesting thing about the prayer hall is they are always oriented toward the city of Mecca. So if you don't recall, the Prophet Muhammad was born in the city of Mecca. Mecca is considered the holiest city in Islam. And so every place of worship is oriented in the direction of Mecca. If you're out in a field somewhere and you're engaging in prayer, you are praying the best that you can in the direction of Mecca. And it kind of creates this interesting effect where I've seen where people have entered the mosque, and usually if you're in a church, you're used to like all the pews and everything being oriented in a very specific way that makes sense with kind of the shape of the room. Well, usually it's going to be like carpeted, or it's going to have places designated where individual people can stand to make sure it's all orderly and facing the right direction. We can lay down prayer rugs, but it's going to be kind of at an angle, typically. It's not always going to line up exactly with the walls of the building, and that is to better orient you towards the direction of Mecca. So there's another section usually in the front. It's kind of a little semicircle cutout called a mihrab, which is where the imam, the leader of the prayer, where he stands to lead the prayer. And then you're going to have typically a minbar or a pulpit where the preacher's going to do his thing. And then most mosques are going to have a minaret, which is a tower where the adhan, or the call to prayer, is issued from. Now, not every mosque is going to have one of these, especially if they're smaller. But by the way, the one who gives the call to prayer is called a muezzin. If you guys know the right way, correct me if I'm saying any of this wrong here. But yeah, so that's what a minaret is. Sometimes there's more than one. Sometimes they just use speakers. It's not always that there has to be a live person doing it. They'll use a recording and project it through speakers. And then a very common feature of mosques is they have a dome. And a dome it symbolizes the vastness of heaven. So the dome and the crescent moon are very common in Islam. And then as you enter the prayer hall, there's usually what's called a wudu, which is a washing area. So Muslims, before they pray, they engage in a ritual washing, and they have a particular area that is designated for that. So the last particular feature here is that they do not have images or statues in mosques or around mosques. And that is because they take, like we mentioned earlier, they take shirk, idolatry, very, very seriously, as we should in Christianity as well. But Muslims very much live up to that. And so they rely heavily on geometric patterns, on calligraphy, which is often Quranic verses written, lots of, beautiful decorative loops and scribbles and stuff that take a very artistic form, and kind of a general arabesque design to the architecture. So these are all common themes to decorate mosques, but they are very careful not to include images or statues. Moving on, imams and khatib, which I'm sure is probably khatib, but maybe not. Maybe I'm just being pretentious here with my pronunciation. But imam translates to leader. So I'm sure most people have probably heard this before. And khatib translates to orator, preacher, or speaker. So, and oftentimes these can be one and the same person, but the imam leads the prayer. So they are the formal leader of the congregational prayers. And oftentimes, or even usually, they are also kind of a community leader. So if this is sounding very familiar, it's because this is pretty analogous to a priest or a pastor in Christianity. However, something interesting that I just learned is that they are not formally ordained. They don't actually have a system of where, usually if you are becoming a pastor or a priest, you're going to have, your formal training, and then you're going to have a laying on of the hands to officially imbue you with that. That was kind of gross. Imbue you with the weight of that office. And then there's this doctrines of sacramentology. Well, Islam doesn't really have that. The imams, the khatibs, or the imam khatibs do fill that role, and then some, but they have to be male, pious, knowledgeable males of good reputation in the community, and they are selected by the community, or usually a board or some kind of like board of elders or leadership. A couple different ways, depending on where you're at, that they could be selected for that role, but they don't go through formal ordination the way that a Christian does. And kind of, there is a little bit of a difference in approach here, depending on if you're Sunni or Shia. So Sunnis, there's not really a clerical hierarchy, and imams, like I just mentioned, are community-chosen teachers and guides and leaders of the prayers. And, oh, by the way, Fridays are significant. That's when you get the Friday sermon. So Christians usually celebrate on Sunday. We hold church services on Sundays. For Jews and Seventh-day Adventist Christians, the Sabbath or the holy day is on Saturdays. Well, for Muslims, the holy day is on Friday. That's when you get your sermon. So you may be attending prayers all throughout the week, but Friday is the big day of the week. Shias have more structure. So they're going to have a little bit more of that kind of that formal training and study process. And then they also believe in what's called the imamate, I think is how you say it. But they don't believe necessarily, I don't think they believe every imam is infallible, but they do believe in a hereditary line starting with Ali, who was one of the successors to the Prophet Muhammad. Don't worry, we're gonna come back to this later. But they believe that Ali and his kind of descendants up to the 12th generation, I believe it is, they believe that they are infallible. And so you're going to have groups of Shias that put a tremendous amount of weight in their teachings. And it's at this point that I'm going to return to the discussion of the schools of Islam. So I promise we're almost done here. I know this has been a longer video, but I wanted to make sure I covered a lot of the rest of this kind of foundational information before we officially get into moving our discussion of Islam through history and into Islam today and its place in the United States. But schools of Islam. So remember, Sharia, these schools are the different approaches to implementing Sharia in a society, in a Muslim congregation, or on the society of a nation as a whole, whether you're Muslim or not. So there are 4 major schools within Sunni Islam, and there's really 1 major school, but 3 kind of primary schools within Sharia. So remember, Sunnis make up the overwhelming majority of Muslims in the world, somewhere between 85 to 90%. Shias make up a significant minority of Muslims in the world, somewhere between 10 to 15%. And then there's kind of a couple other groups after that, but those aren't always recognized by everyone as Muslim. Usually Sunni or Shia are recognized as fully Muslim. So schools of Islam, they're going to agree on the essentials. So if you watch my Christian church videos, we talk about tier 1 doctrines. So think of this as kind of like the Muslim version of tier 1 doctrine. So it's like your doctrine of Tawhid, the belief in the Prophet Muhammad, acceptance of Quran and kind of the level of importance you place on the Quran, the 5 pillars of Islam. Sorry, I don't know what the heck's going on with me. These are all your Muslim essentials that Sunni or Shia or whatever school within, you are going to agree on all these. So where it's going to differ is on secondary matters, which can be a huge thing, which can be where you spend most of your time on, but it's going to focus mostly on the interpretive tools, the different approaches to using the interpretive tools of Sharia. So remember, we had the Quran, we had the Sunnah, we had consensus, and then reason and analogy. So each of these schools focus on different levels of emphasis on those different things. So these all emerged in the early centuries of Islam, the first couple centuries, and they're typically named after either their founder or their most important person in its development. So let's get into it. So Sunnis, they have, school number 1 is the Hanafi school, which is founded by Imam Abu Hanifa, who died in the year 767. This is the largest school in Sunni Islam, and it emphasizes reason and analogy. So that last of the 4 primary tools in Sharia law, in interpreting and understanding Sharia law. So it's also, these have different regions of the world where they are more prominent. So the Hanafi school, you're going to find most prevalent in the nation of Turkey, in Central and South Asia, so kind of the Stan countries there, as well as India and Pakistan, and then also parts of the Arab world. So the next one, number 2, is the Maliki school. So this is founded by Imam Malik ibn Anas, who died in the year 795. So you can see these were kind of developing about the same time. And it relies heavily on the practice of Medina's people and public interest. So I apologize, I don't exactly know. Some of this I was kind of just copy-pasting from resources I was finding online. But it is most dominant in North and West Africa and some of the Gulf states. So kind of squished in there between Saudi Arabia and Iran. but it The third school is Shafi'i, and it was founded by Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi, who died in 820. So again, not a big span of time here between when each of these developed. But this is a very structured methodology that balances the texts, so Quran and Hadith, with reason. So you got kind of a balance here. So not as much predominant one over the other, but kind of a balance here. And this is widespread in East Africa and Southeast Asia, like countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, as well as Yemen and Egypt. And then finally, the fourth school in Sunni Islam is the Hanbali school, founded by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who died in 855. And this has the heaviest emphasis on the literal text, which is the Quran and the Hadith. And it has the least use of opinion. So this is the smallest of the four schools of Sunni Islam, but it is still very influential because this is the primary school in the nation of Saudi Arabia. So, and Saudi Arabia is important for a reason I'm going to discuss briefly on my last note in this video. So, real quick, the Shia schools, the three major schools, and they are all tied to a belief in the imamate, which is that belief in the divine hereditary leadership, starting with Ali. The first school is the Jafari school. This is what's called 12er Shia Islam. This is the largest group. So it's named after Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, who died in 765. And it emphasizes the teachings of those infallible imams alongside the Quran and Sunnah. So I want to be very careful here and not say that they exceed, but they're kind of in similar level there. So, and they are followed by most Shia in the nation of Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Bahrain, and parts of South Asia. The Zaydi school is named after Zayd ibn Ali, and it is found mostly in Yemen, and that's about all the information I had on it. And then Ismaili is the third school, which has its own legal interpretations and is in smaller groups kind of spread throughout the world. So that is the major schools of Islam. And the last note that I will give here, so I referenced Mecca, and then I referenced Medina there for just a quick second. So these are some of the holiest cities, and I referenced Saudi Arabia. So these are the holiest cities in Islam. There's three primary ones. You got Mecca, which is the holiest by far. You got Medina, and you have Jerusalem. So Mecca, I need to do more research on why Jerusalem is considered holy. I understand that when the Prophet Muhammad died, some Muslims believe, or maybe all Muslims, I need to verify this, but they believe that he had, they call it like the night ride to Jerusalem, where essentially, as he was leaving this world, he rode a steed, I believe it was like a fiery steed, that took him flew through the air to Jerusalem, and then his last moments on earth were actually in the city of Jerusalem, specifically where the Mosque of the Dome of the Rock currently stands, and then they believe he took off from there up into heaven. So that is why it is the third holiest city in Islam. But Mecca is the holiest city because it is where not only the Prophet Muhammad was born, but it is also where he began to receive the revelations that eventually became the Quran. So he would often meditate in a cave outside the city, and this is kind of where Islam first began. And but after some early kind of gathering some followers, but meeting a lot of resistance, he eventually threats to his life, he eventually had to leave the city of Mecca, and he migrated so he sent a lot of his followers ahead of himself, and eventually he himself left and went to the city of Medina, which is the second holiest city, and that's where he really got established. He became the leader. He was well loved there. He became the leader of Medina, and really strengthened his community, and this is where they kind of began to get into some of the earliest battles of Islam that movement from Mecca to Medina is where Islam begins its calendar. The Muslims have their own calendar, and that is where year one begins, is right in I believe they call it the Hijrah, his movement from Mecca to Medina, and then eventually, before the end of his life, he does return to Mecca, And this becomes Mecca and Medina together become the very heart of Islam as it begins to move into the world. So this all occurs between, and we'll get into more discussion in the next video, but this all occurs. So he was born in the year 570. He begins receiving revelations in Mecca in the year 610 and continues on until his return to Mecca, where he lives out kind of the very tail end of his life until the year 632, when Muhammad passes from this world, and we begin the successors, which are called the caliphs, which translates to successors. And I apologize, there's probably a weird cut there. I think it ended my recording there, so I just wanted to make sure I got this all in here. So I was just wrapping up talking about the kind of the life and the timeline of Muhammad there and the importance of the cities in the area. So I'm going to stop there because I'm running out of time and memory space here on my phone. But thank you guys very much. If you've watched to the very end of this video, I really appreciate it. If this has been beneficial to you, I would appreciate you liking this video. If you would love to see more and support the channel, please subscribe. Follow me on X if you would like to do so as well. But let me your thoughts. Let me hear your criticism. If you think I did a good job, if you think I did a poor job, if you just want to offer some corrections or thoughts, I would appreciate hearing from you in the comments. But other than that, I appreciate you guys watching. I am losing my train of thought. I'm very tired. It's the end of a work day here. So thank you very much. God bless you guys, and I will see you next time.